The seasons that I think we really are concerned about are not the seasons of nature, but the seasons in persons.
I don't remember Hume's thought. I remember David Hume. I am so certain that if we can meet in some timeless period, that he and I would understand each other. It would be a great disappointment if he said, "You misunderstood me, I don't even want to talk to you anymore." And I would say, "But look, I spend so many hours with your thoughts." And so it's this total awareness not only of persons alive, but the aliveness of everybody who's ever been alive, that a library should represent. Jules Lafort talked about the dead, the poor dead. Well, I think there are poor dead who had a chance to live and didn't live much. But I can't believe that Einstein was one of the poor dead. He's one of the rich dead. Literature lasts by its capacity to haunt. And life all the time, and as Ezra Pound said, the days are not full enough and the nights are not full enough, and life slips by like a field mouse not shaking the grass. Well, everyone senses the loss of days. At the same time, they are competing for some fullness for the days. And so there is, I think, appropriately to poets, a kind of sadness. Humor has been notoriously lacking in poetry. When it is, it's the called verse, comical, satirical. But I don't think Dorothy Parker's poems will ever be given the respect they deserve, because they didn't seem cathedral. They didn't talk with the resonance of events. And now the question is, how far can we go to make the moments of life not just true stories, but experiences so deep that whether you've had that experience or not, the writer has convinced you that you did have the experience.
Petunias are sweet old ladies leaking at the grocery door. Me, I'm a weed awaiting winter, crisp and dry and cackling on. But I'm a flower in the fall, with none of spring to grieve for. And it's the haunting quality of the disintegration that so many people identify with autumn, a foreboding of a winter they dare not face. There's a kind of sadness, of course, in the falling leaves, but there's also a kind of promise of the spring. The leaves have a message as they lay upon the ground or fall gently to the ground, as what Brooke would call mild denying gestures. They seem to be promising that if you believe that leaves can fall, you must believe that leaves can bloom.
Lifted by the good cheer of the mind awake, dizzy glad for the sad, foolish wonder of the immensity of man, come, grow younger still, younger than the moment first. This is a poem called Once. Once, long ago, or now, or never, time grew tired of happening. The face of clocks were sleepy, and the sand in hourglasses burned with fever and mirage. Birds were stilled in flight, and echoes waited in the air. Sun and moon were one at last, flowers were always in bloom, and children are forever young. So I remember standing in the Poet's Corner and reciting poems. William Shakespeare's statue is there, or at least a small one of him, but his presence is everywhere there. And to each of these poets I recited a poem, and they came off the wall, gave me such a warm smile of appreciation, that then I got embarrassed and hastened out of the place, because the most dangerous thing you can do is to encounter a poet, especially a dead one, that's come alive while you're reciting. But I remember that visit. And the poetry is the vitality of man, of his culture, of his memories, of his hurt. All of these are so alive and stay alive through the poets that to believe that death in any narrow sense could be an expression of what a human being is to deny all the things that human beings have proved that they are. And that's the reason I think the poet should make an effort to lift people from the occasions of agony and pain and let them see how poetic all of existence really is. Every human being blessed with inarticulateness does not mean that that person doesn't have all the poetical moments present, or they would never recognize them when the lines are written by luckier persons who happen to have some words to say. And there isn't a poem on any day. I know that I have been guilty of the sin of omission, because poems are there to be written every single moment of the day. Valéry, the French poet, was also quite an intellectual about poetry and wrote many essays on the origin of poetry, almost the mechanics of composing a poem. You can think of Robert Frost, I'm going out to clean the pasture spring, I'll only stop to rake the leaves away, and wait to watch the water clear I may, I shan't be gone long, you come too. I'm going out to fetch the little calf that's standing by its mother, it's so young. It totters when she licks it with her tongue. I shan't be long, you come too. Now, that was one part of Frost, as there is of nearly every poet, something we call lyrical. But I don't think you've seen the fullness of the poet until you see that he also explores certain of the prosy poetic moments in life, tending to be philosophical, maybe a little wordy, but nearer to a prose account of events, a description rather than a piercing summation. You find in the novelists, for instance, Tolstoy, time and again, pauses in the narration to catch people in a painting, sitting in a garden, watching the sunset, so that prose reaches for poetry, but poetry has a right to reach for prose. It's the poet's prerogative to be wise about everything except himself. In fact, his folly is his greatest wisdom. And if that's so, I certainly am entitled to some poetry because I have plenty of folly. I had a brother who had committed suicide at 25, who was a very precious poet. And I had spent 4 years reading after I took a master's degree because I hadn't read anything. I had only gotten degrees and read snatches, anthologies, parts of things. I've never written a story about a villain. I don't believe him to exist. That man is inherently good. He's inherently confused. And if he's confused, any number of consequences can come from confusion. Economics is a very interesting study of the desperation of man. I've said that myself, trying to justify our coexistence, that I became an economist to see the predicament of man, and I was a poet to sympathize with his feelings in his predicament. My insights into the nature of the economy have been tremendously rewarding because I believe myself to understand more profoundly what's necessary in America if it's going to continue to be a haven for certain types of freedoms and opportunities that it really does possess, but not as fully as it needs to.
Children do not ask questions at very early ages about celebrities. They ask about the world. And something happens to this brightness and inquisitiveness, which I think can be laid as a responsibility to the miscarriage of education by the educators, by the whole system. So I worry to this day that we have failed to help human beings. We have characterized them in terms of measures of attainment, and we've never looked at the total person. I believe nobody except the demonstrably feeble-minded is inadequate to understand the nature of their society. And when the Catholic Church began to lose authority, or the authority of the Pope to interpret doctrine, the Protestant assumed that he could know on his own. He could know with the Bible, through the Bible, but he did not have to have a representative of God. He was the representative of God. Then the question is, how do you know right from wrong? How do you know at all? And so Immanuel Kant, who's often called the philosopher of Protestantism, but his interests were really deeply in morals and the theory of knowledge, tried to find some principle that could be used. And the principle he announced is a categorical imperative. Act so that every single act could become a universal act. We cannot have free people without adequate information and adequate reasoning. Well, I think I'm trying to bring into my own teaching in a limited way what I believe are the philosophical and essential demands of an informed society. And I don't think democracy will survive as an idea unless the assumptions we've made about the participants, the voters, the citizens, it becomes a major component of the educational process. And society has got to find a way to afford it. Or another way of saying it, at least they ought to know the cost of not affording it. That they choose the trivia of adornments and fantasies of various sorts and material objects, and they're not wise enough about the real cost of what they have chosen. Jung, the great psychologist, argued that we are composed of a number of selves, and we elect or are forced to choose one of those selves on which to build a career. And after about 20 or 25 years of perseverance about that person, life wears thin. There's diminishing returns, as the economist says, to the skill itself. And then you're looking around for new life. Well, Jung said one way to find new life is to find one of the selves that you did not recognize, which is contained in you, and start living that other life. A second chance, another person contained in a single body. Going this way once more around, these are my offers. To be a mathematician, symbol keen, lonely at the edge of reason, or a musician, black illiterate, dripping music from his fingertips. Nothing middling. I won't be teased half alive by zero sums and numbers larger than my eyes.